We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're leaving it for. And the question that was left for you is, what is the area of your focus that you are most dying to talk about, which you are almost never asked about?
This book, the Bible, which is my tradition. Evidence for science in the Bible.
What do you mean?
What we've been talking about is the body and the health in the body. I'd like to put to the test some of the statements in the Bible to see if they work scientifically.
Like turning water into wine?
No, well, potentially. That's a miracle. What I was referring to is this, and this is what I've actually done, and it's actually quite interesting, is, Paul, who is one of the New Testament writers in the Bible, wrote to the Corinthians, don't you understand that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? I said, that's a really interesting statement. How would he come to that conclusion? Like, what does that mean, the temple of the Holy Spirit? So the only temple at that time was the temple in Jerusalem where they would have the sacrifices and things. So what I did was I went back, and this is answering the question, is I'm looking for evidence of scientific truth, probably unknowingly, by some of the writers in the Bible to see whether or not there is truth. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So if you look, and most of Exodus 25 through 30 is this painstakingly detailed description of the sanctuary that Moses built in the wilderness that he supposedly got from God. This is what he says. So here's a great way to see whether or not this all fleshes out. Moses is saying, here's the description of the pattern that I got for the temple. And Paul is saying, your body is a temple. So here's my hypothesis. If we look at the pattern in the temple, should it match the human body that they had no understanding of at the time that Paul wrote this? Like, we didn't know about cells until Van Leeuwenhoek in the 1600s. We didn't know about the circulation of the heart until the 1600s with William Harvey, okay? Yet, if you look in the human body, you have the blood system. You have blood circulating around in the vascular system. And then it goes into the interstitial fluid. And then the interstitial fluid then goes to the cell, which there's a plasma membrane on the cell that you can't penetrate through, but unless you actually have the proteins to go. And then it goes into the cell, which is a compartment with two compartments within it, right? You got the cell and the nucleus, right? This is exactly the same structure that Moses was given in the wilderness. And by the way, Hindu temples are actually similarly designed. There's sort of this three-part situation. So you have this altar of sacrifice, which is where the blood is. That's the blood in the human body. Next, you move to the laver, which is this container full of water. And that's the interstitial space. After you go from the blood into the interstitial space, any pharmacologist will know that this is exactly the pattern that you move to. The next thing that comes is this structure that has a veil that you can't penetrate through unless you go through it. That's the cell, because the structure is the building, and it's got a room within a room. And that's exactly what the cell is. The cell is this nucleus surrounded by the cytoplasm. Well, in this room that you go into at first, there's pieces of furniture in there that are very similar to the types of organelles that you see in the cytoplasm of the cell. For instance, there's this 7-branch candlestick that's in there that's burning olive oil and producing energy. That's like beta oxidation producing energy. That's exactly what you see in the mitochondria. But the final thing is you move into the nucleus. And this temple has something called the most holy place, where there's this altar of, where there's this Ark of the Covenant. You've seen Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
And the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's this Ark, and you open it up, and this is where the 2 tablets of stone, the 10 Commandments, rested. So in that area, you have 2 tablets of stone written by the hand of God, the code of life. And according to Jewish and Christian belief that this is the law, And if you break the law, that's how sin is, and the consequences of sin is disease and death. Well, when we get to the nucleus of the human body, you have two strands of DNA. And on the strands of DNA is the code, the nucleotides, of which is the code of life. If you manipulate that code, that leads to mutations, which leads to disease and death. None of this was known until 1950 when they discovered DNA. And yet, we have Paul who's making this jump and saying, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. I just find that fascinating. Nobody ever asked me about that, but that's what. As soon as you ask that question, that's the first thing that pops up. By the way, there's so many other places in the scriptures where I see that alluded to. It's fascinating. Paul talks about the body of Christ and how it's one body, but it's made up of parts. There's the hand, the foot. He didn't know about cells, but that's exactly what the human body is. The human body is one body made up of many parts. Van Leeuwenhoek didn't discover that until the 1600s. We didn't have cell theory until the 1800s. So it's interesting to me how statements are made in ancient texts which have scientific relevance far below the surface. I just find that interesting.